The CIA has issued a new assessment that it's more likely that COVID-19 emerged from a lab rather than nature. For years, the agency said it could not conclude whether COVID-19 was man-made or nature-made. Now the agency says it believes the virus emerged from a research lab in China.
Our safety and our security, certainly in the context of public health, is connected to the health of the world and well-being of the world. And we saw that with with the COVID-19 pandemic. Right now, we're facing the bird flu potential pandemic. There's so many different dangers, Ebola and other things. And so we need to have an international entity that is working to make us and the world safe. So if we aren't part of the World Health Organization, we're going to need to recreate another entity kind of like the WHO.
But says it has low confidence in that assessment. Why are we now getting this call? Well, CIA Director William Burns says he asked the agency's analysts and scientists to make a clear determination, stressing the pandemic's historic significance.
So it's one thing for the CIA to say that's their intelligence. It's very unlikely the Chinese government's going to admit to this, right? So what happens now?
Yeah, probably nothing. That's a very unsatisfactory answer, I think, for a lot of people. But just trying to be pragmatic in the way that governments work, inside this global community of nations, if you want to call it that.
So absolutely. Sandra, as you know, I'm a liberal Democrat. I was one of the first people in early 2020 to raise the possibility of a research-related origin, a lab accident, as the origin of the COVID-19 pandemic. I've been working very aggressively on this for over 5 years. John Ratcliffe, the new CIA director, was my partner and colleague and our chairman on the Heritage Foundation Bipartisan Commission on China and COVID-19. It's been clear to me for 5 years, and I think it's increasingly clear to many other people, and certainly the CIA, the FBI, the Department of Energy, and most people just around the world, that the by far most likely origin of COVID-19 is a lab accident in Wuhan. And your question is exactly the right one. How do we get accountability, not just for retribution, although that would be appropriate, but to make sure that we're setting a standard that you can't just launch a global pandemic that leads to 28 million excess deaths and tens of trillions of dollars of damages and just get away with it. So this is to make the world a safer place. John Ratcliffe and I and other commissioners, we came up with a plan with 18 points of how we can hold China accountable. The most important piece of this, and we have draft legislation on this already, is to amend America's Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act to basically let America's courts, let Americans sue the Chinese government and Chinese state entities, Chinese affiliated entities and agents in U.S. courts for COVID-19. And that will force a level of accountability that China's done everything possible for 5 years to evade.
You can only imagine.
The Chinese regime under Xi Jinping has not been transparent in any shape or form, right? And they've gotten away with it, right? So millions of people died. And, if this had happened as a result of a lab in Australia or a lab in the U.S. or a lab in the UK, the world, would have spent the past several years kicking that country in the backside repeatedly and consistently. The Chinese regime seems to have gotten a free pass for this.
To the many times that the Biden administration, through multiple people, denied this theory of a lab leak over the years. Listen.
Just pointing that it came from the lab, and there will be responsibility for those who funded the lab, including yourself.
This committee will allow the witness to respond.
I totally resent the lie that you are now propagating, Senator.
Most coronaviruses that we know of are of origin that have infected the population. SARS-CoV-1, MERS, generally come from an animal origin.
There's been no consensus on this, on where COVID originated, so I'll just leave it there.
All leading up to this moment where Tom Cotton said this on Fox News Sunday with Shannon yesterday. Listen.
I said from the very beginning, COVID probably came from that lab. I didn't have access to classified intelligence or special scientific knowledge. I just used a little common sense and looked at the facts and understood what Chinese communists do. The important thing now is that we have to make China pay for unleashing this plague on the world.
Which led the opinion piece in the Wall Street Journal editorial board to write the CIA is waking up to COVID's origin. Trump officials may be able to restore the public trust by being more transparent about controversial intelligence findings or facts that the Biden administration wanted to stay secret.
But we are releasing this information. They're not indicating that they have new intelligence. But look, this is supporting an assessment from the FBI in the U.S., from the Department of Energy in the U.S., and from others who also believe that this was a lab leak. And look, there was talk about a lab leak well before COVID really broke through, right? So early on, the year before it happened, there were already people saying, well, we've got this Wuhan lab. We've had problems with safety and security and conduct issues there at the lab before that are documented. So it is highly likely that this came from the lab, but then suddenly the narrative shut that down. And in part, I think it shut it down because it was inconvenient from a political perspective in the U.S., which had helped to fund the lab. So there's a lot left here to uncover. I just don't think it will be uncovered.
Okay. The CIA now confirming this, sir.
Well, it's one of the things President Trump and I talked about. Part of what we have to do is we have to restore Americans' trust in our own institutions, like the intelligence community and law enforcement, and that includes the CIA. And, one of the things the president stressed, the purpose of the CIA is to protect Americans, to keep us safe from foreign threats and foreign adversaries. But we also need to be truthful with Americans. And he has stressed to me and others that, these aren't mutually exclusive missions. We can do both. And so in the case of the CIA, which is the best foreign intelligence service in the world, after 5 years to not have a public assessment, to be honest with the American people about where the likely source of a pandemic that killed millions around the world, including 1 million Americans, and really impacted all 345 million Americans in some way. People lost jobs, they lost houses, they lost their health, they lost their businesses, all of that. And so I had the opportunity on my first day to make public an assessment that actually took place in the Biden administration. So it can't be accused of being political, and it does assess. The CIA has assessed that the most likely cause of this pandemic that has wrought so much devastation around the world was because of a lab-related incident in Wuhan. And so we'll continue to investigate that moving forward. But I think it was important for the American people to see an institution like the CIA get off the sidelines and be truthful about what our intelligence shows, at the same time of protecting us from adversaries like China if they caused or contributed to this.
So I think if anyone's going to push the Chinese regime, then we have a much better chance of that happening under the new administration, the Trump administration. You could argue that one of the reasons why it was released, because we've now got a new director at the CIA, John Ratcliffe, and he has talked about this and the importance of providing some level of transparency around it. So I think that's a natural thing. Now, I do think that it will become a part of discussions when it comes to issues such as tariffs, potential sanctions, pushing back against the Chinese regime in other ways. So I think, yes, I think this will factor into that. I just don't believe that it will change the Chinese regime's behavior and that suddenly they'll become transparent.
Okay, thank you, Mike. He's definitely rattling the cage, though, isn't he, Trump? And there was also that indicator of power over the Panama Canal as well in his acceptance speech once he became in that inauguration. Interesting.